There is a grain that needs no planting. It reseeds itself year after year for thousands of years in the same waters. It produces twice the protein of white rice. It contains more antioxidants than wheat. And for 5,000 years, it fed entire civilizations through harsh winters without a single drop of fertilizer. Then, in the 1950s, university researchers decided it was time to liberate this grain from the people who protected it, to domesticate it, to control it, to patent it. What happened next destroyed the oldest agricultural economy in North America. This is the story of the food that grows on water, and the fight to take it back. Welcome to Nature Lost Vault. The archive opens in northern Minnesota at a site called Ogema Geshik Point. Researchers analyzing ceramic pottery fragments found something remarkable. Carbonized food residues and microscopic plant silica bodies called phytoliths were present. Radiocarbon dating placed them at 170 CE. Nearly 2,000 years ago, people were processing this grain on an industrial scale. But the story goes back even further. At Coates Paradise Marsh near Rice Lake, Ontario, fossil pollen appears in layers of soil dated to 3000 BCE, that is 5,000 years ago. When the first Egyptian pyramids were just being conceived, indigenous people here were already managing a complex aquatic food system. Archaeologists found jigging pits, circular depressions in the earth where animal hides were placed, filled with grain, and stomped on to thresh the hulls. This was not casual gathering. This was sophisticated food production spanning millennia. This is wild rice, scientifically known as Zizania palustris, the only grain indigenous to North America. The French voyageurs called it folle avoine, wild oats, but the Anishinaabeg called it Menominee, the good berry. According to oral histories, the Anishinaabeg people followed a prophecy. They were told to move west until they found the place where the food grows on water. That prophecy led them to the Great Lakes, where wild rice grew in such abundance that it looked like a prairie on top of the lake. The harvesting method was elegant in its simplicity. 2 people in a canoe. One uses a push pole to navigate gently through the rice beds. The other sits with 2 wooden sticks called knockers. They bend the stalks over the canoe and gently tap. Only the ripe seeds fall. The rest stay on the plant to ripen later. Crucially, some seeds always fall into the water. This was the planting. The harvest was the sowing. The system was self-sustaining. Generation after generation, the rice returned. It was vital. Alexander Henry admitted in 1775 that their voyages could not have been completed without the supply of wild rice acquired from indigenous people. Without this grain, the fur trade would have collapsed. The explorers would have starved. And nutritionally, it dwarfs our modern staples. Wild rice is a complete protein containing all 9 essential amino acids. It has twice the protein of white rice. It has 3 times the phenolic compounds of wheat. It has twice the B vitamins. It is rich in antioxidants, potassium, and phosphorus. And unlike white rice, which spikes blood sugar, wild rice has a low glycemic index. Studies show it improves insulin resistance and blood sugar control. So we have a self-reseeding grain that requires no planting, no fertilizer, no pesticides, and no irrigation infrastructure. A superfood that sustained civilizations for 5 millennia. So why is it not the foundation of American agriculture? Because you cannot sell what grows for free. The erasure began in the late 19th century. Outsiders claimed title to the swamps and lakes on reservations. They declared that indigenous people had no right to the food growing in the water. Dams were built for logging, altering water levels, and drowning the rice beds. Mining industries spewed sulfates into the lakes, poisoning the roots. By the early 20th century, nearly 2/3 of the wild rice habitat in the Great Lakes had been destroyed. But the most calculated destruction came from academia. In 1901, Albert Ernest Jenks, an anthropology professor at the University of Minnesota, published a study titled The Wild Rice Gatherers, a study in American primitive economics. The title reveals everything. Primitive. Jenks wrote that wild rice held them back from further progress. He dismissed a sustainable 5,000-year-old food system as backward because it did not use plows or fences. This attitude became policy. In the 1950s, researchers at the University of Minnesota decided to improve the crop. They entered treaty lands. They collected genetic material from natural stands without consent, and they began to domesticate it. They created new strains: Johnson, M1, M2, Netum, Voyager. These were not designed for nutrition. They were designed for machines. Scientists engineered the rice to hold on to its seeds tightly so it would not shatter. They engineered it to ripen all at once. They moved it out of the lakes and into paddies, flooded fields that could be drained and harvested by massive combines. Everything indigenous harvesting stood for, gentleness, reseeding, sustainability, was engineered out. By 1968, paddy-grown rice was flooding the market. Big corporations like Uncle Ben's and Green Giant stepped in. They flooded the market with this industrial crop. The price of wild rice collapsed by 40% in a single decade. The indigenous economy, based on hand-harvested lake rice, was decimated. Then they stole the name. In California, 1,500 miles away from the native habitat, companies began growing this genetically altered grass in massive paddies. They called it wild rice, even though it was domesticated, even though it was grown with fertilizers and pesticides, and even though it had never touched a natural lake. 3/4 of the wild rice sold in supermarkets today is actually a tame industrial field crop. And then came the patents. A company called NorCal received patents on wild rice traits. They developed cytoplasmic male sterility, a terminator gene. These plants are sterile. They cannot reproduce, and they cannot produce seed for the next year. If this genetic modification escapes into the wild, into the sacred lakes of Minnesota, it could sterilize the natural population. It could kill off the ancient Menominee permanently. The Ojibwe are now fighting a battle against biocolonialism. They filed lawsuits charging false advertising. They forced Minnesota to pass labeling laws. Paddy rice must now be labeled paddy grown in letters at least half the size of the words wild rice. But that law does not apply to California. The deception continues. But here is what they cannot patent. Here is what they cannot control. The knowledge itself. Despite the pollution, despite the patents, despite the industrial competition, the Anishinaabeg continue. In the late summer of 2023, thick stands of true wild rice shimmered gold in the lakes of Lac du Flambeau. The plant had been virtually absent for decades, but after 6 years of restoration work, the grain returned. The Great Lakes Indian Fish and Wildlife Commission is reseeding lakes across Michigan and Ontario. They are proving that wild rice is not just a crop, it is an ecosystem. The rice beds serve as nurseries for fish. They feed migrating swans and loons. They filter the water, absorbing nutrients and keeping the lakes clean. What industrial agriculture wanted you to forget is this. You cannot commodify a self-reseeding grain. You cannot sell fertilizer for a plant that needs none. You cannot sell tractors for a grain harvested by canoe. You cannot sell annual seed for a perennial that plants itself. Wild rice represented everything industrial agriculture opposed. self-sufficiency, local control, food security without corporate dependence. So they tried to destroy it through oversupply. They tried to contaminate it with genetics. They tried to patent what they did not invent. But the knowledge persists. In the gentle tap of wooden knockers on grain stalks, in the smoke of parching fires, in the elders teaching the youth that money cannot eat. The Anishinaabeg followed a prophecy to find the food that grows on water. That knowledge survived 5,000 years of climate change, war, and migration. It will survive this too, because wild rice is more than a grain. It is proof that the best agricultural systems are the ones that require nothing from you, the ones that give endlessly, the ones that industrial agriculture cannot replicate, cannot control, and cannot destroy. This knowledge isn't lost. It's growing in the water, waiting for us to remember. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to Nature Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom. The next vault opens soon.